Hi, my name is Junko Yoshida, editor-in-chief of the Ojo Yoshida Report. Thank you for joining in with us today for a session called India Ripe for Next Steps. We will present this to you in a pre-recorded video format, but a live Q&A session will follow right after the video. CEVA is the leader in innovative silicon and software IP solutions that enable smart edge products to connect, sense, and infer data more reliably and efficiently. With the industry's only portfolio of comprehensive communications and scalable edge AI IP, CEVA powers the wireless connectivity, the sensing of sound, vision, and motion, and on-device inference in many of today's most advanced smart edge products across consumer IoT, mobile, automotive, infrastructure, industrial, and personal computing. CEVA powers more than 18 billion of the world's most innovative smart edge products, from AI-infused smartwatches, hearables, and wearables to autonomous vehicles, 5G mobile networks, and smartphones. With more than 60 CEVA-powered devices sold around the world, every second we power your world. For more information, visit www.ceva-ip.com. Hi, my name is Junko Yoshida. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Ojo Yoshida Report. We have a special panel today about India ripe for next steps. And we have a fabulous panel today. Besides my partner Bolaji Ojo, the publisher of Ojo Yoshida Report, we have 5 people on the panel. And I'd like to thank first Amir. He's the CEO of CEVA, who is a sponsor for this panel. Thanks, Amir.
You're very welcome.
I would like everybody to just say your name, title, which company you work for, what you're interested in. So we're going to start with Amir.
Hi, everyone. Amir Panush, CEO of CEVA. We have a very special interest in India. We see it as a strong growing market with lots of innovation and very fast moving. And those are the market that we really like to go and support and be part of that ecosystem.
Excellent. All right. I'm going to go to Neil.
Hi, this is Neil Shah from Counterpoint Research. I'm based out of Mumbai, and we are a global industry analyst firm and tracking everything from chipset to cloud and everything in between. So wherever a chip goes, we go and track that market.
Very good. And then what about you, Samir? You're also calling from India.
Yes, hi. My name is Samir. I am the co-founder and the CEO of Boat Lifestyle, which is a consumer devices company out of India.
Very good. And then I'm going to Arijit.
Hi, I'm Arijit Ray Chaudhary. I am a professor and the school chair of electrical and computer engineering at Georgia Tech. I was born in India. I went to school in India, and then I went to grad school in the US. It's been more than 20 years. I worked in multiple companies in the US before I moved to academia. And of course, apart from my roots in India, and I've always, in the last 20 plus years, I've been here. I've worked with, the different IITs and all on research topics and other stuff. And even today, we have a growing relationship with India in areas of semiconductors, the energy sector, as well as AI and data sciences. So that there's a lot of stuff that's going on with India, and I'm super excited to be here. Thanks.
Very good. And last but not least, Ajit. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name is Ajit Manocha. I left India 50 years ago and went to grad school in the US and started my career in Bell Laboratories, Philips Semiconductor, NXP Semiconductor, and CEO of Global Foundries. Now I'm CEO of SEMI. SEMI is the global industry association. And the reason I'm involved with India is that India is really now on a mission to make India a semiconductor nation, and semi actually helps enable the ecosystem in the various countries. So I'm very excited to support India on its mission.
All right, very good. Balaji, would you like to say something?
Well, just very briefly, the Ojo Yoshida report has been focusing on India for a while. We've gone from will they ever do it to being convinced that not only does India want to make itself the new or latest frontier in the semiconductor industry, but it really doesn't have an option. Semiconductors have become so critical to what every company and every economy does that India is itself showing that it is going to be a major player in this market. So this is an opportunity to explore what India is going to be offering in the near future.
Very good, thank you. We kind of sketched out the outline in terms of where we want to focus, right? There are several areas that we want to focus. First one is really the India's booming consumer market. You know, when you talk about the electronics industry, you really need a big consumer or the local market, right? That's number one. And number two is that we have known. I've been working for before we established Ojo Yoshida report. I have worked for EE Times for a long time, and I remember that we have written about India's software talent, and especially as the really EDA companies descended on India long time ago, right? So we want to talk about India's software talent and design prowess. But third point that we want to mention, this is kind of the original focus. That was the India's continued interest in manufacturing semiconductors locally. So we want to dive into that. And then I think what we're trying to do is look at India in a bigger ecosystem. That means startups. What about startup chip companies in India? Do we know any, and what's going on there, right? And then, last not least, is that India has actually become the world's most populous country, surpassing China. So that actually speaks volume of the importance of India uh, for the global market. So we want to try. We're going to dive into that little bit of where India is trying to position itself. But first, I want to start the conversation really from the from the bottom, which is really the how is the consumer market in India growing over the last several years, or actually several decades actually. So Neil, I'm going to depend on Neil to give us your take on what you have observed over the last few decades, transition of the consumer market in India.
Right. No, thanks for having me here first. And definitely, India is, as you said, the most populous country, and I am a contributor to that as well, from population perspective. But the overall, if you look at the consumption, the middle class is growing. India is home to one of the youngest population as well. Like less than 30 years of age is more than 65% of the population. So it's a huge consumption market. And over the last couple of decades, there has been a lot of digital revolution happening as well with the advent of mobile phones. And India being a mobile first country, right? So everything has become more digital. Everything has become more mobile, especially after 2015. Uh, we have also started manufacturing phones, manufacturing devices in India, right? So if you look at the consumer electronics plus mobile and wearables, right? So that market itself is like a $85 billion worth consumption market, and that is going to grow to almost I would say close to $135 billion by end of this decade. So it's a huge opportunity, and it's not just about domestic consumption. Once as we started manufacturing in India, we are also exporting from India. So the semiconductor consumption is not just about imports but also for exports. The overall market is even bigger than that when it comes to manufacturing and uh, develop and not only for local consumption but for external consumption as well. So it's significant.
Interesting. I think this is a perfect segue to put a spotlight on Samir, who is a co-founder of a very successful consumer electronics company, both in India. So tell us, you know, you when did you actually establish this company, and how do you think that the success of your company relates to because of your location, India? Tell us a little bit about that.
So yeah, I mean, thanks for having me on this panel. And like Neil said, right, I mean, we are a very, very populous country, and the digital revolution in India has kind of taken off, right? So back we started Botan back in 2016, and the idea was to offer consumers something that was not done before, right? If you look at what had happened across across the globe, is all the international companies would come to India and sell their produce, but there's no Indian homegrown startup who understood the consumer really well and tailored a product for them, right? And that's the idea with which Aman and I kind of started this company. In terms of consumer spending and consumerism per se, right? If you look at, we've grown to become the second largest wearable company in the world. Of course, that's in unit volumes, maybe not in value, but it also shows the aspiration of a young Indian audience, right? They want to be right up there with the best technologies across the world, and that's where a lot of the consumerism is happening, and people are actually consuming so much more content, right? And content in a mobile first country will always be driven through personal hearing devices, and that's how we thought about the brand, and that's why we believe that we've grown and become so big.
Excellent. Well, actually, the first time I came across both was through Siva. When I was interviewing Siva, they brought up boat, and I said, "How do you spell that? Did you just say boats?" And I said, "No, it's boat, BOAT, right?" So I'm going to ask Amir that you have been working with both for a while and the other companies as well, I'm sure. And how, what did you find different, or what attracted you to work with India companies?
Yeah, thanks. So first, it's really great to be on the panel with all of you guys. And Samir, thanks for the business and the relationship for now almost 2 years working together. So this is really appreciate it. But going back to your questions, we at Siva, we provide basically, and we look at a complete offering of IP, from connectivity, wireless connectivity, to sensing and ability to provide immersive type of capabilities, to also running all the processing that is needed, including AI at the edge. Now, where we approach basically the India markets, but even more specifically about it, we really appreciate the business. What we offer differently than others, and what attracts us to India, is that we offer a solution IP and not necessarily component IP. And by solution IP, I means that we don't just offer blocks of IP, but we help our customers if they need to custom that and to drive it to be nicely integrated in a very cost and power efficient way, as well as providing all the software stacks and the additional IP that helps the Indian ecosystem, as well as, for example, both and other companies, to really differentiate with features and additional capabilities beyond just the core IP or the core silicon IP. And overall, the approach for us in India is really, and that's how we worked also with both, is to some degree the trial and error. Go make decisions fast, go in, try to make it happen and to make it work with, again, very efficiently. And then from there, take it to the next level, working together hand by hand.
Are there anything different about India companies? You have a lot of you have a lot of partners around the world. Is there any specific things in India that attracts you?
I think that overall, when they look at the technology, they want to see ability to custom that and make it, again, performance from a power perspective for edge devices, as well as cost, to be nicely integrated and very effective. And with that, I would say the approach of Siva versus the much larger typical IP companies is really to make those decisions quickly, work very closely with the customers, and then drive it successfully to the market. Because the India ecosystem is still in the so-called emerging and in the early stage. With lots of so-called trial and errors and moving and trying to do things differently. With it's again large population, but at the end of the day, it's also quite cost sensitive, and the magic is to bring very innovative features and capabilities that typically you see in the top tier brands, but really driving that to a great brands like Bolt and what they're doing in the marketplace.
All right, very good. I'm going to move on a little bit towards the software talent. Everybody knows that India really excels in software. And I think this is the area that I'm going to first depend on the Arijit professor that what do you really, how did this whole thing happen? Why did India have become such well known for its the software engineering talent?
Yeah, thanks, Junko. So I think that's a great question, and I think there are several dimensions to it. I think the first thing, of course, um, is just the scale, right? So there are lots of people in India who are kind of interested in education. They pursue STEM education. They are doing math, science, engineering, and all of that, and that leads to a lot of software talent being grown domestically in India. The second thing I'm going to say is software to grow software talent, particularly to educate a large number of students the skills of algorithms and software. You don't need a lot of infrastructure. So if you think about India and the evolution of India, starting from independence, 40 years after independence, when you don't have fabs in a country, you don't have access to hardware design. Software is something that you can get started with. And that's what happened, I think, in India in the 70s and 80s, where a lot of people were kind of interested in engineering and STEM, and this was one way of actually contributing, which was software. And I think about it very very, it's very similar to how, if you look at the journey of startups, right? So how many semiconductor or hardware startup companies have you heard of that is built by a 20-year-old? Not much. If you're 20-year-old and you're building a company, it's probably going to be in software. So I think the same thing happened with India. So after independence, when India was young, it started with software. And now I think now the country is getting a little older, more mature. There is talent. There is second generation of talent. And then there are more and more companies, international companies, that have invested in design talent in India. Now we are seeing hardware and semiconductors also emerging as a very viable opportunity for students to pursue and kind of grow in that area. So yeah, I think a combination of I'd say lack of infrastructure in the early days, plus just hunger to do something interesting, and STEM education. I think all of this contributed to the growth and the explosion of software in India in the last, I'd say, 30, 40 years.
Excellent. Well, now I'm going to go to Ajit because Ajit has actually been observing what's going on in the electronics industry globally, and especially given your background, you are a astute observer the progression India has made. So let's first dwell on this software element, software engineering talent in India. What did you observe, and what do you see changing right now?
As Arijit talked about the emerging of software uh, skill sets and components, competence in India, I think that became very obvious when companies started developing hardware, that hardware really needs software. So the interdependence of hardware and software led to the focus on India. I remember during my Philips days, I was asked to set up the e-business and go to India. I was 30 years after I left India, I came to India and spoke with the IT companies, and I realized the potential is huge because the India has the best talent in the world, and STEM education is still the most popular in India and other Asian countries as well. And I was very impressed with what India has to offer. And I being in hardware all my life, and during 80s and 90s, we realized that how dependent we are on the software to add more functionality into devices. So that led to really more focus on India. Plus, with the emergence of computers and so on, the industry realized that you can develop the designs ecosystem in India because that does not require massive investments. and it only requires the smart talent, and that's what we have big in India. So that's how the design houses started developing in late 80s and 90s, and India has about 20% of the design capacity, semiconductor chip design capacity in India now. So I think there's a lot more convergence going on between software and hardware, and especially with the now AI arena, requires a lot more software, and AI is becoming the next major boom for the industry, and AI is enabling a lot of growth. So maybe I'll say more a little later.
Yeah, all right. Very good. I think Amir already told us a little bit about the how the SIVA works with help its customers in India, right? And when you do that, I mean, are you seeing the changing demands and needs from your Indian customers right now in terms of software, hardware? What are they looking for? What are you seeing the transition?
Yeah, I think as Ajit pointed out just as he finishes talks, what we see is really a strong transition towards the need to drive AI at the edge. And what that drives really is multiple things that are needed with so-called the edge devices in the IoT space. One is really more processing power and ability to run efficiently neural networks at the edge. This is where we see with our product line for AI, from the very low end type of performance like TinyML all the way to slightly larger LLMs, the needs to drive it locally. So that drives really processing power. But also there is more demand for the different wireless connectivity to get the data in and out, from the simplest Bluetooth connectivity that moves to uh, high data rate, so-called Bluetooth 7.0 or HDT, to Wi-Fi that is moving to Wi-Fi 7. And in some cases, like for specifically in India, we see a much more adoption of narrowband IoT and other 5G reduced capabilities, infrastructure capabilities, to be able to all those edge devices to be able to communicate it across basically all geographies within the large India country. And the last piece is really all the sensors and ability to make decision with all the inputs and output and processing power to run that locally in the device. So we see those customers need those different type of IPs, but really the combination of those IPs coming together, as well as again the software stacks and the additional application features that needs to come on top of that. And for example, in the wearable space, where we have roughly about 50% market share today enabled by our IP technology outside Apple, what we see is the needs of the Indian customers basically to have access to the ecosystem out there, because we have heavy scale of different partners that using already IP and that was ported to their devices, were able also to connect between the companies that are growing up in India, from the smaller startup to the larger companies, to the worldwide access of different IPs and silicon capabilities.
Yeah, this is the element of AI hasn't isn't exactly what I had in mind, but it seems like it's becoming a perfect bridge for India to go from software talent to the hardware. And I would go back to Ajit to explain this transition, how you see this software centric India ecosystem is transitioning to the chip manufacturing all the way. I mean, how the transition in how's the talent the transfer engineering talents are transferable, and how the transition is happening. Tell us.
Well, first of all, I will not say that the talent is transferable, but there is much more interdependence on the talent for hardware and talent for software, because of in India is very good in the software. People are very good in developing the firmware and the middleware and so on, but also there is a risk of cyber securities and all those things. But at the same time, the hardware has to embed all this software with these features and functionality into the hardware. So there's a lot more convergence and interdependence of hardware and software. I think this goes hand in hand, and I don't think a software engineer can develop a chip and vice versa. So I don't see the transferable, but I see a lot more interdependence, a lot more working in sync with each other, and that's the beauty of having design houses in India. That the work goes on 24 hours, so the time difference and all those things between the West and India, and people can communicate via internet, uh, throughout the day. But I think the most important thing is when I think Amir talked about the AI, that how AI is putting more pressure on the hardware. Also, it is putting pressure on the energy consumption by the chip, and also on data centers. So the hardware people have to really be much more focused on bringing new materials into play, and that's really not a skill set of software people. The to bring I If I go back to my inception days of semiconductor industry in 1980, we use maybe 8 or 10 elements of the product table. Now we use more than 80 elements of the product table in making a chip. So, and that's really not, software engineers probably have no clue on these things. So that's why I'm saying hardware engineers have a lot of expertise in material science, double E, chemical engineering, chemistry, physics, but a lot more dependence. So, and it's gonna actually increase.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. So, given that background, the thing that always kind of perplexed me is that why has India been so focused on semiconductor manufacturing? In other words, that we have run lots of stories. Actually, one of our contributors, the tech writers, writing, has written a couple of stories about recurring dream of India, because India had the various projects and the start and stop of, let's make chips in India, but it goes so far, but it doesn't really materialize. I mean, this is it's a lot of attempts being made. So I want to go back to this. Is India prime to do all the way the semiconductor manufacturing, and if so, what needs to take place? But I'm going to go to the Arijit, because Arijit and Ojo Yoshida report did talked about this a little, I think, a couple months ago. That Arijit, I think at that time, Arijit, you're talking about that. Well, India should be really focusing on the advanced packaging rather than 2 nanometer fab. And where do you stand on that thesis, Arijit?
I think I'm still bullish about it because I feel like that's the first point of entry. I feel like if you look at what's going on with Micron setting up their ATP center in Gujarat, I think that's a great example of what can be done in a handful of years. Versus look at semiconductor manufacturing that has been going on in Taiwan. It has taken them what 40 years, 40 plus years to be at the point where they are. So if you start today and you need to take 40 more years to kind of catch up, I think that's probably not the right investment. And also look at the amount of investment you need to be able to make for cutting edge logic and memory fabs. I know that these are aspirational goals, but given, let's say, there's always resource constraints, right? No matter where you are. So I'd say I think that some of the initial movement I've seen in advanced packaging and testing and assembly that India is doing, I think can give you much higher ROI. If you look at what's going on semiconductor manufacturing, as in the fab, even in the US, looking at what's happening with Intel and IBM and TI over the last 30 years, and global is more global in the true sense. So I think if you look at the challenges that the fabs have faced in the US, for example, I think Indian fabs will also face very similar challenges, right? So I feel like yeah, I mean, aspirationally we would want to have a fab. I think it provides redundancy to the supply chain. It also creates more opportunities domestically, particularly for the space agency, for example, which is great. In India, that's a great driving point. The defense sector and all of that. But given the constraints, given the difficulty of actually running a fab and setting up a fab and building 2 nanometer chips, I think ATP is probably the first point of entry. And I still feel very strongly about it.
At the same time, Arjit, here's there are other facts that If you split it into two, you have the enterprise section, the businesses, the industry itself, and then you have the government end. All of them are looking at various factors, as you are very well aware. There are geopolitical issues that the government has to concern itself about: defense, security. In some ways, once these, and I think anybody on this panel can address that, the goals may be different at some level, and the directions that the companies and government, the Indian government, will take will be different. The reason I say that as an example is, if you look at the amount of money that the Indian government is willing to vote for semiconductor manufacturing locally, it's huge. Okay. But at the same time, the points you are making are very, very valid. So when you look at that situation, the challenges, which direction do you really think the country is going to go? Is it going to be split, enterprise heading in one direction, government trying to pull in another direction?
I think Ajit was about to say something, so I'll let him speak.
Well, I want to build upon what Arijit said. First of all, I've been in manufacturing or operation all my life. I've done multiple wafer fabs in multiple countries. I've seen the rise of Taiwan, the rise of South Korea, the rise of China in semiconductors. I witnessed that and I was involved in many of these things personally. India has been asking for building a wafer fab. There used to be a phrase from one of the previous CEO of AMD: the real men have fab. And when they realized that the capital intensity is so huge, then the men lost some of the interest in wafer fabs, but assembly and test still much less investment. Then the phrase is real countries have fabs. So India was always asking fab. But my biggest concern about India was India never had a clear vision. It never had a clear policy. In order to have a fab, you must have ecosystem for semiconductors. So for the first time, I think the stars are aligned in favor of India because of the geopolitical issues, because of the private public private capacity and the growth of the industry. I think pandemic has done one thing very useful, except everything else was damaging. 6 million people lost, and I hope it never happens again. But people realize how dependent we are on semiconductors. I think Neil and Samir made that comment that semiconductors has become foundational to every industry, and more importantly, foundational to the humanity. So that has realized for Indian government to set up a policy which for the first time makes a lot of sense. I think I give a lot of credit to the Prime Minister Modi that he came with a great vision that he wants the country to become a semiconductor nation, and the two leaders, political leaders, they actually understand semiconductors, so they came up with the right policy for India, which will attract the companies to bring ecosystem into India. And on the top of that, SEMI is our role is to really enable ecosystem in various countries. And the reason the timing is right, industry, if you look at the IC revenue, in last 70 years from 70 years to now, we are at $600 billion annual revenue. In next 7 years, it's going to double to 1 trillion. So the question really is, do we want to have the growth in the same big hubs in the world? And we were really hurt by the supply chain disruptions during pandemic because of climate issues, because of geopolitical issues, and many other issues. And now the growth is doubling, and growth is doubling mainly because of IoT in the previous decade and AI in this decade. That growth, we need more powerhouse, we need more hubs in the world. And India, as the other my co-panelists talked about, the in terms of the consumers market and the population based, and also now the right vision, there's a lot of potential for India to go. And the most important thing for India also is India has a lot of green talent. India produces more than 800,000 engineers every year. Unfortunately, they cannot find jobs in India. That's why you see a lot of Indians are all over the world. Now, if these Indians can really help to promote the country, but they're not only promoting the country, they're also promoting the whole world, because the semiconductors is needed everywhere in the world, and it's going to double in the size in next 7-8 years. And if that's not enough, just wait another wave coming in the next decade. There's the wave of quantum computing, and that's going to take the industry to maybe 5 trillion in 2050 or 2060. So I think there's a lot of potential. Stars are aligned, and India has all the ingredients except ecosystem for semiconductor. And I think the SEMI is having the first inaugural Semicon India on September 11 to 13 in New Delhi, Noida. And actually, I'll invite all my co-panelists to be there and see that how many companies are coming from all over the world to bring their products, their services into the country. Now it's up to India to really accept them, learn from them, and help them grow their shops in India and so on. So I'll stop here and back to you, Bolaji.
Well, can I just follow up what Ajit said? Because Ajit said, well, for the first time, India has a clear policy for the towards the semiconductor manufacturing. Paint a picture to me, the contrast between the not so good India's semiconductor policy before and what is so different for this time around. Can you paint the contrast between the two?
Are you asking me that question?
Yeah.
Well, I think before, like I said, it was more like we need to have fab. It was kind of a sexy thing to have fab in the country. But I mean, anybody can build a fab for $10 billion, but to make a business out of that is not straightforward. So, and to make the fab successful, you need to have $10 billion create ROI. You cannot just have the money sit there and say sometime we'll make output out of this. No, it has to be a real business sense. We're all business people. Every penny we spend has to bring some ROI. At the same time, like I said, this is the first time the policies are right, and they are definitely make sense, and also the potential is huge. So we need to grow the semi industry and grow in many countries, and India is one of them. And I think India is definitely taking a lead in this. The other important factor, I'll tell you one, that semiconductor industry is the second most profitable industry, but only individual companies can make money if they do it right and they get the ROI. The other important factor about semiconductors, it's a 4.4 GDP multiplier, uh, and for every job in the wafer fab, you create 5+ jobs in the ecosystem. So it's really another. Despite AI will make some more productivity, but this number of jobs and the employment will definitely continue in this. So some of the jobs may be AI jobs and less hardware job going forward, but it will definitely create a lot more jobs. And India has the population, has the ingredients. So I think we need more understanding of the ecosystem concept and drive it faster. Time is of the essence now.
From the enterprise point of view, Amir, how are you seeing this? When you look at the fact that the government is determined now, and like Ajit said, they have a policy in place, but it's going to affect you. So, from your perspective, with your enterprise perspective, how do you see India's push for additional semiconductor fabs in the country?
Well, one thing I may add here, moving aside a little bit from the discussion about fabrication and fabs, what we see on the design side is that we definitely see with so-called the CHIP Act that we see globally, but specifically right now in India as well, more money going into helping the ecosystem go and develop so-called new designs, new IP. And with that, we see startups and also larger company get some funding and help. With having said that, it's still different from what typically we see, let's say in the US and China or other regions where we see lots of great bootstrap and early access to funding, but so-called going to the next level when you need high single digit or double digit type of supports financially beyond just the proof of concept. That's where we still see a more of a struggle within the India ecosystem. And from our point of view at SIVA, basically with that understanding, we're trying to come with a more flexible business model, so-called sharing the risk, helping the early companies to come with a good proof of concept with lots of solution IP. And then hopefully from there, they can take it to the next level, and then we can support them, of course, going to production. But I think that supports across so-called ecosystem, from fabrication to assembly to design, silicon design, to how to enable IP, working also with the EDA ecosystem, will propel, considering that post-COVID, a much better understanding of the importance of semi, as well as the geopolitical and the supply chain challenges that really drives much more focus on those activities.
So I'm going to ask Samir because the you are in the system business, but from where you sit, are you seeing any sort of emerging India-based hardware startups? I'm talking hardware meaning chip startups. Are you seeing them at all, or do you think that you need them? Can you explain?
So essentially, right? I think the idea here is to have better control on the supply chain, and that's probably one of the things I think that the government's going for. And if you look at the domestic consumption also, right, in consumer devices, cars are becoming all electronic, right? And India's a car manufacturing hub. So I think, that's one of the reasons that the government's actually thinking about, bringing semiconductors. And it's really funny that you would speak because, just last week we signed up a kind of an LOI with an Indian startup where, these ex-Intel guys, 8 of them, who are in chip design and research, have come to India and started a startup, right? And they got hardwired, and they're creating a very basic MCU to start out with, but the aspiration is to go into full-fledged chip design. And like my panelist said, right, we produce about 800,000 engineers every year, right? So we have the talent pool. I think it's just about taking that talent pool and putting in some money so that we are able to. And India is known for frugal innovation, right? We've not ever had billions of dollars to splurge on anything, but still we've grown as a nation. So I think that with that little bit of a support, I think I see a large kind of a chip design base emerging out of India over the next 15-20 years.
Oh, that's fascinating. I want to know more about that little company you just talked about. What about you, Neil? Your market research has been mostly focused on more of end products, but are you looking at semiconductor companies in India at all?
Yeah, we are looking at semiconductor companies everywhere. As I said, we are now looking from end to end. We started with devices, focused on devices, but now we are looking at everything. So if you look at India, to add to what Samir was saying, and what Ajit also mentioned, we are now seeing brain gain rather than brain drain, which was happening a few years ago. We are seeing a lot of these matured semiconductor company professionals, which were in US or Taiwan or Korea, the Indians, they're coming back and they are aligning with the policy which Ajit mentioned. The policy is so good with design link incentives, production link incentives. They're coming back and designing chips, manufacturing chips, creating IP, partnering with different IITs to start building a next pool of talent for their startups. And we are already consulting with a few companies which have actually come from US, working. Some were working with Qualcomm, some were working with Intel, some were working with Broadcom. They're coming and starting new startups, and those are basically chips. Again, to Amir's point, like the DSP is revolutionizing the AI and the compute and sensing, right? So many of these startups are working on DSP-based solutions. Rather, it's an infrastructure for like a L1 stack in infrastructure for telecoms, or whether it's in for sensing or IoT modules and so forth. So we are seeing a lot of brain gain right now, and government policy has been really welcoming. They're putting out a red carpet in terms of even shelling out dollars, what they call as pari passu basis, where you invest 50%, or you invest $5 billion, we'll also give you $5 billion. So I think it's very fascinating right now. As Ajit said, stars are aligned for the industry, and we are seeing a lot of talent coming back and starting these new companies.
Let me please quickly follow up with Arijit because of your background in academia, and also we're aware that you also consult for companies in the industry. If you look at the government determination to have fabs, let's take that as a given. Okay, the government wants to push in that direction, but we've also talked about the dichotomy of hardware, software skills. If you were consulted by India today and you were asked to draw up a plan, what kind of skills would you say the country should begin to emphasize and how should they go about it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think one of the things, like Yunko, you mentioned about the software talent transitioning to hardware. I would say that need is not for the transition to happen, but for an augmentation to happen, because the software talent that India had should remain. But software itself is changing, right? So, programmers, how many programmers do I need? Maybe not as many as we needed like 20 years back, because of whatever, language models and so on being more adoptable. So I think the software talent itself will pivot a little bit, will change, will evolve as we bring in more AI tools. So I think that part of the market, that part of the global, I'd say, ecosystem that India has control on at the moment, which is software, that should remain. I think that's India's biggest asset, even today. On top of that, hardware, particularly as Neil was mentioning, Samir was mentioning, there are folks coming back from the US, from Europe, from Asia, like the East Asia, and coming back to India and starting design companies. I think that's an area where there is a lot of investment. There are lots of design companies that are doing very good work, and they are ready. I mean, India itself is a very large market, right? So I think they are ready for the Indian market. Like, for example, boat, for example, if they would want to use one of the MCUs that is locally grown in India, think about the ecosystem. Like, it's all local, the market is local, everything is local. It's a very, very robust ecosystem. So India itself has a large enough population that itself can be a market for some of these chip manufacturers, which is not true for the US, which is not true for any country in Europe, for example. They need to have a global market to have any kind of ROI. But India, I think you can just be in India and be successful. But at the same time, I think some of the smaller design companies are really doing some very good work, and I see some of them actually, have LOIs. They have partnerships with many of the bigger design companies in the West. So I think that is the next segment where I see a lot of innovation, a lot of investment, and these are becoming very, very successful on the fabulous design company side. And if you look at the most successful companies in the world today, they are fabulous design companies. So I think they look at the Nvidias, look at Qualcomm's, Broadcoms. I think they are doing well, and I think India is kind of going in that direction very, very in a very robust way. And next comes, as Ajit was mentioning, I think the stars are aligned. So the aspirational goal will eventually be to have a fab, whether it's a wafer fab, or whether it's a packaging fab, or whether it's a package and assembly test, that kind of packaging. And I think the boundary between a packaging fab and the wafer fab have blurred now, right? Because it's kind of a you're looking at heterogeneous integration and all of that. So I think that's an area where there are lots of unknowns. If you look at the big manufacturers in the US, like when TSMC started their Arizona fab, their biggest problem now is they don't find enough people to come and work in the fab. There is a huge workforce talent shortage. So I think India doesn't have that, will not have that, at least in the foreseeable future. So I think that's where whether it's wafer fab, whether it's packaging fab, I think that's the next step for India to kind of get to, but without sacrificing all the gains we have had in software, all the gains we have had in design. I think, and then if we add some sort of a manufacturing capacity in India, I think that'll be awesome. So I think that's what we should all aspire to.
Yeah. All right.
If I may add to that, what Arjit said, and to follow your question, SEMI also collects data on how many fabs are announced and how many fabs in operation. As we speak, between now and 2027, 104 fabs are somewhere in the phase of construction to operation in the world. And of course, India has announced first fab by Tata in partnership with the power chip company of Taiwan. And also Micron announced the assembly and test, as Arjit mentioned before. I think these companies will probably create catalyst for the next 100 fabs to come in the remaining part of the decade, because even those 104 fabs, when they are commissioned, it does not give us $1 trillion revenue. It is about three quarter of a trillion. So there is a lot of potential, a lot of opportunities, a lot of opportunities for India to grow assembly and test and kind of wafer fab. As boundaries are blurring between the two, so I think this is the right time. Most important thing for India is to make the companies who are already announced, make them very successful. First time right, and every time right. I think that will incentivize other companies to say, let's put a fab there in the country, in India, because we need more fabs to be distributed around the world, not in the same country. And then the geopolitical risk and the risk of climate are so huge that we cannot have the supply chain fragmentation as we had in last 3-4 years.
This is not just about India, though, Ajit. The ecosystem has to be supportive. You represent the industry. I've seen you talk about how all of these geopolitical areas and issues have impacted the industry. India cannot just go and say, we're going to set this up and that's the end of it. They need the support of the industry. That's one. Secondly, what kind of windstorms do you think they might run into? The same happened with China. Is India likely to face anything similar? So, how much support will India receive from the global industry, and how is geopolitics going to play into this?
I think a lot of support is needed across the globe. This is an interconnected industry. I mean, if you look at the basic foundation of this industry, substrate wafers, which will start silicon wafers, they're produced in Japan, some in Europe, and some in US. Chemicals produced in many countries, but the most ultra pure chemicals or materials for this industry, Japan is a leader. Europe is also a leader, and we need more leaders like that. Design houses, US and India. Assembly and test, Southeast Asia. Wafer fab manufacturing, Taiwan, South Korea, and some in US and some in Europe. I think we need to have all this part of the value chain everywhere in the world, and they're connected. When a chip is produced today, the starting from the substrate to the chip, it travels more than 30,000 miles before a chip is delivered to a customer. If there was a frequent flyer program for the chips, they all will be platinum elite. So we are very interdependent around the globe. So India is actually a democratic country. It can work very easily with many countries. But the most important principle for this industry is respect for the international laws for IP protection, cybersecurity, national security, and an English-speaking country like India. I think makes a lot of sense. And not because I'm from India and I'm saying it. I'm speaking on behalf of the industry, global industry, that India and many other countries like India should really step up. And that's why there's a CHIPS Act coming up in many countries. There's a need for growth all over the globe. So I think this is the right timing, and let's make it happen.
Well, that's very good. I think Ajit actually summed it up in a very nice way. But I'm going to throw in one more question. I know nobody wants to, get so political, but at the same time, the elephant in the room is China, right? Everybody's worried about China, and I'm not putting China down. China is an important element, important country in the whole global economy, and yet here comes India. The argument of that we have the largest population was the argument China used many decades ago. Now, India can get to use that argument, but at the same time, tell us, I'm going to go round robin, tell us where you think India shines, India's edge over China. Ajit already mentioned English speaking and the democracy, the copyright IP, that sort of thing. Can anybody want to raise a hand and say a few words? Yes?
Maybe
Yeah.
I can start. So I think all fair points on talent, English speaking, as well as the intent, policy making. I think where India also shines is if you look at all the semiconductor companies, all the fabless superstars, right? That's largest or second largest R&D center is in India, right? So that is a very unique position to be in, right? So lot of talent and lot of expertise, know-how, lot of engineering talent primed to work on semiconductor stacks, software stacks, as well as design. Only thing is the IP didn't belong to any Indian company. It went to US companies or other companies outside, right? So I think that is the biggest difference between China and India. China is very good at manufacturing at scale, right? But when it comes to English speaking, as well as software, and as well as the overall, I would say, architecture of the nation, it's more less democratic, as Ajit said. India is more democratic, right? So that makes it easier for trade and that interconnect between different companies across the world, right? So I think that is, I would say, the biggest advantage we have, apart from good talent, English speaking.
Very good.
I think also to add on that, I think if we look at the so-called the mega centers for semi technology and innovation, right, are those places that you have lots of talent, like India, as well as in China and the US and other areas, but also large population with ability to consume a lot. So the export and the import is very strong. If you compare it, for example, to Japan and Korea or Taiwan, they don't have that scale of consumption. And then if you compare China and India, China definitely is also very important, of course, business for us. But India is uniquely positioned today because to some degree, there is more isolation that is happening in China and India going still opening up to be part of the whole ecosystem while having those very two important ingredients. Lots of innovation and R&D and access to employee base, as well as large consumptions and ability to basically go and drive the demand.
I know I'm going to go and add more on the softer side of the things, right? And the softer elements include, just as a nation, the confidence that we have now, right? And over the last 10 years, the kind of, if you look at India has always been a services oriented nation where we've developed stuff for, America or any European country and exported. But if you look at over the last 2 decades, we've had some solid software product companies also come out of India, right? You talk about Zoho, that does about $1 billion of recurring revenue, or you talk about Freshworks, which is listed in the US, right? So India as a product nation is also, it's got the confidence to be a product nation. I think that is one of the things that has changed in the last 10, 20 years. As a country, we are a lot more confident. We think that we are able to do certain things. And of course, there is, money available to do it, right? And that kind of is like a perfect recipe for, getting things done in India. I mean, that's at least the way I look at it.
Very good.
I can add one more point to this discussion, which is, and I've always I'd say last 10 years or so, I've been fascinated by the number of folks who are of Indian origin who have global leadership in big companies, like Microsoft, you look at, what's Ajit, for example, he was the CEO of Global, right? So Samir, you're a successful company in India. I think there is a huge amount of leadership skill amongst Indian leaders of various generations, which I have always found very distinguishing and very interesting and important for the growth of India. Because I think leadership means not only having a technical acumen, but also having that EQ, right? That you need to be able to employ people, keep them, retain them, and grow them. So I think that's something which I've always found very unique amongst Indians, and I feel like just looking at the statistics of it, that's where I think we have an edge, on China. So we'll see. I think that's my hypothesis.
Yeah, good point. All right. Well, thank you very much for sticking with us. This was getting actually even more interesting towards the end, and we could talk on forever, but maybe we'll do the panel too sometime. All right. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye. Siva is the leader in innovative silicon and software IP solutions that enable smart edge products to connect, sense, and infer data more reliably and efficiently. With the industry's only portfolio of comprehensive communications and scalable edge AI IP, Siva powers the wireless connectivity, the sensing of sound, vision, and motion, and on-device inference in many of today's most advanced smart edge products across consumer IoT, mobile, automotive, infrastructure, industrial, and personal computing. Siva powers more than 18 billion of the world's most innovative smart edge products, from AI-infused smartwatches, hearables, and wearables to autonomous vehicles, 5G mobile networks, and smartphones. With more than 60 Siva-powered devices sold around the world, every second we power your world. For more information, visit www.siva-power.com. semi-ip.com. Hi, my name is Junko Yoshida. I'm the editor-in-chief of Ojo Yoshida Report. I'm here for the live Q&A session for the India panel we just played back. And we're lucky to have Amir Panush, CEO of SIVA, as well as Samir Bahu. He is the Director of Communications, standing in for Ajit Manager. He is the CEO and President of SEMI. And I've got Bolaji Ojo on this panel. So let's dive in because, we were just talking before we turn on the camera why India doesn't have its own India branded chip company yet. We know that India has a lot of talents, a lot of design experience, and a lot of ambitions, and yet we can't name a single India semiconductor company. Can you answer? Maybe Amir, you have some ideas?
Thanks a lot, Janko. I think first, we don't have it today, but it's really in the making. And I think if we look at the different type of semiconductor startups that are coming today in India, we have lots of local talent as well as talent coming back after spending many years outside India. And with also money that is coming and helping both from the private VC industry, the local industry, as well as from the government. We see more and more design capabilities to go and design the next generation of semiconductor products, coupled with lots of software experience and expertise that has been in India for many, many years. And we see those things ramping up. And as the so-called the ecosystem will get built up, I strongly believe we'll see also, large, stronger local semiconductor brands being successful in India in the coming few years and in the next decade.
Amir, if I may just quickly follow up on that, it's a competitive market. It's a tough market to be in. How strongly will they be, these companies that you talked about, and the fact that the Indian government is so supportive? We agree that the stars are aligned and the ecosystem seems to be coming together, but they've got to play in a very tough market. How prepared will they be?
No, first, it's not going to be easy. Semiconductor is a tough competitive market. But again, if we look at what typically the India tech industry and the type of designers and mindsets the marketplace has in India, it's always a very strong push to be very cost effective and be able with that cost effectiveness to scale it up with lots of local so-called pull in and support from the local brands. In the session that we had previously with both Samir CEO and other local product brands, they are looking to really get more supply locally, both from the ability to go and define the specific requirement that they need, as well as the access basically to the supply when they need it and with the cost structure that they want. So I think that pool will also create some advantage locally, as we have seen and still see to some degree in China and also in the US. So yeah, it's competitive, but there are other things in India that will help them so-called to go above that line and be able to supply more and more volume locally. And then from there, going more globally, of course.
True. Well, I have a question for Samir, because I understand that Semicon India is opening its curtain tomorrow, right? And what is SEMI's ambition in going to India in this case? I think your microphone is not working. That is bizarre. Oops.
Great.
Okay, so it was working while we were chatting before.
Samir, let me suggest that you just reload Just refresh your browser.
How about now? Am I audible?
Oh,
Oh,
fantastic.
great.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Yes, thank you, Junko. Thank you for the question. So yes, Semicon India. So we have an executive summit that we've partnered with the government of India on that is starting tomorrow, and then the exhibition and program officially kicks off on the 11th in Greater Noida, Delhi. So very excited. The Prime Minister is going to preside over. Prime Minister Modi is going to preside over the inauguration of the event on the 11th, and which really just demonstrates the importance that the government of India is putting on the semiconductor industry and growing the industry and ecosystem in the years to come. So. As the panel, as Ajit Manocha, our president and CEO, and his colleagues on the panel discussed, we really do believe the stars are aligned, where basically of course, there's the geopolitical concerns that have kind of amplified the need for more more semiconductor hubs. Also, climate change is a factor. Some of the natural disasters that have contributed to this momentum to de-risk the supply chain and grow more hubs. So yeah, really, SEMI sees the opportunity, aligned with the government of India, and the policies that they've put into place to really advance the industry there.
Yeah.
I get the points that Samir was making about de-risking the supply chain. When I look at the India's push so far, though, I like to have Amir kind of comment on these. The Indian government itself has not even addressed directly, the challenges of the supply chain, the shortages or things like that. They've talked more about how India needs to be a player. And when they talk about that, they address the issue of companies like Siva that are local companies that are on the ground, that are trying to do some things. You share this desire, this passion for a homegrown industry that's serving Indian enterprises.
Yeah, Balaji, it's a very good question, and thanks for that. Definitely, when we look at how we support the local companies, as well as what we offer them, we really don't come with so-called a point solution of IP, whether it's a DSP processing technology, or wireless communication, or even AI accelerators. What we come and we are trying to understand what use case they are trying to solve with the product that they are going to build. And then across that, we are basically providing a complete solution of IP, including the hardware and the software IP on top of that. And in some cases, even customizing that to the use case. So for example, there is a company today that they were looking for wireless communication for the cellular IoT to create more access to communication, not just with your handset, but with many different type of terminals, smart meters, and so on. But they need on top of that all the software stack, as well as accelerators to run neural networks, or so-called the brain and the machine of those devices, to provide more value. That's how we come, and we're trying to understand the use case and enable a full solution for those customers. And especially in an ecosystem where so-called it's in the beginning, and that's where you need to take so-called the extra mile of providing more than just a point solution. And the government, of course, that the more that there will be a support, so then they directly and efficiently into the semiconductor startups and new companies that are coming up, it will accelerate, because every time to go and build those type of devices, of course, it's quite significant investment. It can't be just a prototype. It needs to go all the way to production and high volume ramp. And that's where, of course, governmental support that go and work in so-called coalition with the VC private industry locally can make a big, big difference.
Is it much more easier on the IP side than on, let's say, the Samir side, which is on the semiconductor equipment side, or on the manufacturing side? Do you have it more easier on the IP side, or do you see a larger market to serve there?
The answer is yes. First, the so-called the time to get the product out and time to market is faster. Building a fab, building the whole infrastructure take multiple years, and then lots of so-called know-how that you need to build over many years, whether it's a process technology, material technology know-how, and with an IP, and that goes along very nicely with so-called the local ingredients of strengths that the India market has in the tech industry, which is lots of design. It started with software design, but then the silicon is designed like a software. It's basically you write the code and it becomes an hardware macro IP code. And that's where when you provide those things with the local talent, that will and get accelerated much faster than, let's say, building a whole new fab or a whole new battery technologies to manufacture and those type of things, which will come as well. I think it's all starting today very heavily with packaging, assembly, test. That's the first step. And then we will see much more heavy manufacturing related to fabrication of silicon, as well as even, battery technologies, material technologies, and so on.
Samir, you mentioned earlier on that with Semicon West, you're having the executive conference discussion in India tomorrow, actually tomorrow. I wanted us to just pull back and maybe ask, when did you start engaging, when did Semicon itself start engaging in India, and what's the process been like? I realized that the Prime Minister is going to be there to open this event. So I know there's a high level of government involvement, but can you take us back to when you started engaging with them?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, it's a great question, and it really points to the growth and the change in India over the past few years. So when I joined SEMI, I've been at SEMI for 5 years now, and when I joined, Ajit was going to India, and he was speaking at some of the IIT institutions, and he was talking about his message was really, there's an opportunity on the table. India needs to step up. You need to put the policies in place. For the first couple of years, that was kind of the message he was trying to deliver, to really inspire them to clarify their vision and put the policies in place. Over the last few years, I'd say the last 2 years in particular, with some of the ministers in place, some of the ministers that the PM has put into place, there's just kind of a change, a clarification of the vision, strengthening of the policies overall. Of course, we've seen kind of the investments that the government has made to bring in some players to start that ecosystem momentum. So now I'd say now we're getting to the point where the last few trips to India, Ajit spoke at the Vibrant Gujarat Summit at the beginning of the year, and his message was much more, okay, policies are in place. The next step now is to really to follow through, to continue building the ecosystem. So the message has evolved over time to kind of this point of the building blocks are there. Now you need to follow through and continue the momentum.
So what is the long-term expectations that you have there? I asked this question because when we had the first recording, Amir talked about the ecosystem, talked about the entirety of the system, right? And how each one was beginning to kind of slowly come together. On the semiconductor equipment side, that's really a little bit far out, in my opinion, but I may be wrong. I wonder, what is your expectation? What is Semicon's expectation for the Indian market?
Sure. Yes. Thanks, Balaji. So I would say, Ajit actually did a press conference earlier this week and talked about the growth. If you look at the overall trend for the semiconductor market and kind of the projected growth around AI and just through the end of the decade, of course, AI touching all markets, automotive, just the growth that's expected. The industry is poised to double over the next, through the end of the decade, to more than $1 trillion by 2030. So with that growth in mind, SEMI has, as part of our market data reports, we've underpinned the number of fabs needed to achieve that level of growth. And through the end of the decade, there's potentially 150 more fabs that are needed to reach that level of revenue for the industry. So looking at that, we see what's in place already for India, and there's the question is how much can India carve out of that growth?
I mean, I think it's important. We're almost out of time, but I think I would really like to do this. My reason is very simple, which is that the story so far has been very positive. I know there's a lot of struggles on the way. There are a lot of challenges, but every single thing that I've read, and having covered this market now for some years now, the Indian story is changing. And I really would like you to leave our participants with a message that you see as the core message from your perspective. And I would like Samir also to do the same. This is my last question to the two of you. What is that positive message, and why is it that you're so hopeful about India?
Yeah, I think that if we look at what we see today in India from a talent perspective, both locally and people coming back, the more focused investment that coming into the industry from the government, as well as more and more private and wealth that is created locally in India, with the consumer companies that are getting big and becoming larger to create that local demand, those things are really coming together. And we are very fortunate to provide the solution IP to the ecosystem of the semiconductor companies out there. And even working with the product guys like Boat and others to drive that demand, as well as the richness of user experience that people can enjoy in India in a cost-effective manner in high volume supply. So I think this is really all coming together. We already see great signs, and the future is bright. So it's all ahead of us.
Thank you. So, Mayor, from the semicon angle, from Ajit said a lot, but I think that I would like to hear it also from another person who works so closely with him.
Sure, absolutely. Yes, echoing what Amir said. I mean, the opportunities, the excitement. We've talked about the stars aligning, the combination of geopolitical needs, the talent gap the industry is facing. That's an important point. We didn't touch on that, but they did on the panel, leveraging India's talent and both in India and overseas as well, but bringing some of that talent back home to help ramp up these fabs that are expected in the years to come. The combination of policies as well, all coming together. And then, of course, Semicon India. We've had a track record in kind of every one of our regions of helping to grow the industry, connecting the region to companies globally. So yeah, we see the opportunity there and the momentum there. We've seen companies investing too, like Applied, Micron, Tata, of course, and pulling in partners. So there is momentum. It's just a matter of keeping it going and bringing more of the ecosystem in and continuing that.
I'm personally aware of one company that I had worked with in the past that today has over 1,000 engineers working in India, over 1,000 in the electronic space, design engineers that are collaborating with their partners all over the world. I think this is a great time, and I know this is our wrap-up session and we're just wrapping up, but I think, Neil, I really would like you to have a few words. The last question I asked, if you were listening, was why are you also positive about India's coming role in the semiconductor industry? Yeah, maybe Neil can't hear us, but Neil participated earlier on, and it's really a pleasure to have heard him speak. I really appreciate your time. I hope we can continue the conversation. I think actually it's not about continuing the conversation. I really would like to visit India next and come and see you, Amir, and talk about what you guys are doing and write the next chapter in the Indian story. We need that story.
Forward. Definitely.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure having you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Balaji.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.